This is the final part. Now we are going to analyze the data in order to be able to analyze the sentiment. This is especially jarring because my data is in Spanish, so I need some tools that allow me to do so in my native language. Some of the approach when you are analyzing sentiment in different language than English is making translation. The idea is not to translate, it's to process in the original language, and that's why I'm going to use Spicy again. So what I'm going to use the same libraries that in the previous ones, Jesus, datetime, pandas, and my personal functions defined. I'm going to load the post as in the previous example. I'm going to explore the post. I'm going to leave this because I want to see the data inside later. And I'm going to use the same scripts than I used before to strip mentions and URLs. These are the same portions of code than the previous part. Now I'm going to fill the data frame. The function is very similar to the one I showed you in the previous part, but with slight differences. So again, I'm going to paste the whole code and explain you the differences from the previous one. So in this case, I'm adding an array of sentiment. And I'm going to find sentiment of the post based on the emojis used. I know it's not a very accurate information, but it's the only one I have because it's pretty difficult to get information in Spanish to train NLP with sentiment. So I'm going to use my own data to create a training set and see how good it is to predict the sentiment of a post. So the idea is to take the emojis. This is a list. Actually, this is an old list. I use this one because it takes this code. That is what I need because of the format that Facebook used to deliver you the data. It uses this one. It doesn't use this one. So I need this table to identify the emoticons inside the text, inside the post. And I did basically self-classification of the sentiment of the emoticons. So I took each one, not all, basically the ones that are more about reflecting a sentiment. For example, this face or this face, it's easy to classify those ones with sentiment. So I did a classification of the emoticons and give a polarity -1 for negative, 0 for neutral, and 1 for positive. What is the approach in this example? The idea is to collect the post and identify if there's an emoticon in the post. And depending on the first emoticon found, because if there are many, it's only going to analyze the first one. If the first one determines that it is positive, so the sentiment of the post is declared positive. If the emoticon is neutral or negative, it will take in the same. So at the same time I'm collecting the post, I'm going to assign a sentiment. If I don't find an emoticon in the post, that is pretty often, so I will define that the sentiment is no one. So there's no data to define the polarity of the post. So that's why if I can find an emoticon, so the polarity is no one, there's no information about the polarity. So this part is the same as the last one. I take a range from one post to another as a ending one. Datetime from the post. I take data if the dictionary has data key. I find if that key has the post inside, and I saved this post before changing. And before doing all the cleaning that I showed you before, I need to define the sentiment. So basically what I do is use the post that I already have and find the emoticons and determine the sentiment. Once I have applied this function, I define that this is the sentiment, and I append that in the sentiment array. I put the same filters that in previously, removing accent, emoticons because I no longer need it, URL, mentions, and I append them to the array. And as in this last one, if I find no information, I put no post. And I do the same if I find the post information in attachment description, the same. Define the sentiment and add it to the sentiment array. Or if I find the post information in the title key, the same one. I get the sentiment of the post and I add it to the array. Okay, so now I create my data frame. In this case, I will have dates, content, and sentiment. I have an additional column. I create a data frame with this dictionary. I save the content row, including the sentiment. This is an additional information I'm adding. And save it in a file, having it filtered from the post that I decided to start to the post finish, and I put it in text, the dates that this implies. That's basically the same function we already had, but adding the sentiment. So let's do an example. I'm going to process the whole 10,000 post. Why? Because I need the maximum amount of data I can use to train. So I'm going to process from 0 to 10,000, and I'm going to create the data frame. It's going to take time because it's comparing if there are emoticons and define them. So in this case, I have these ones with no emoticons. The fifth one has emoticons, and the polarity, the sentiment was defined by 1, depending on the emoticon that was found. Okay, now let's see how often each one is found. I'm going to know how many times -1, 0, or 1 are found. So the majority of the post has no sentiment. Remember that we don't have 10,000 here. We only have the posts that already have text because the others were filtered. And most of them have no classification of sentiment. 4,000, -1, 500, 1, 400, and 0, 49. Because there is a big difference between 0 and the other two, I'm going to do the analysis only with these two, because I can cause a distortion in the prediction if I include 0. So this initial validation helps me to define that, okay, I'm not going to use 0. I'm only going to use 1 and -1. So the following thing is to filter. So I'm going to create a copy of the data frame because I don't want to alter the data frame, the original data frame. I'm only going to use content and sentiment. I'm not going to use dates in this case. And I'm going to remove all the non-post, this one. And I'm going to remove all the 0 classification of sentiment, this one. And this is the data frame that I received. You know that, for example, these first 4 were omitted, and it starts in the 4th position that has a positive polarity. Okay. So now I'm going to start doing some NLP processing, and I want to credit the author of the analysis I'm going to use is Arya Tadvalkar. She has a very good tutorial about NLP using the species and especially using sentiment classification. She does not do it in Spanish, she does it in English, but species allows me to do so in English. So I'm following her tutorial about changing because of the language I'm going to use. Now I'm going to import the NLP libraries. And I'm going to load the corpus. I'm only going to use the Spanish one. It takes a little time. I'm going to use Spanish stop words. In this case, I'm not going to process English post. Okay, and I have 551 stop words in Spanish. Then I'm going to import the learning libraries. So I'm going to use from Sklearn DFID vectorizer, pipeline, train test split, accuracy score, classification report, occlusion matrix. What I'm going to do is basically to create a pipeline that use the vector I already did with this, that is post versus sentiment, use part of this data as training, the other part as test, and see how accurate it can predict the sentiment of the post. Why is this important? I want to stop a while talking about this, because it's not easy to have information in Spanish already classified by sentiment. So probably the approach with emojis is not perfect, but it gives you a semi-automatic way to classify text. The other way is to put people to classify the sentiment of the post and have like a corpus in some way. But we don't have this in this moment. So I'm going to use emoticons as training information. So let's verify there are no null values. I'm going to remove punctuation from the post. So I am going to define a punctuation string. I'm going to add these symbols that are specific punctuation in Spanish. So I have this variable to include the punctuation things that I need to remove. Then I'm going to create a function to do some data cleaning. I'm going to copy the code and explain it in detail. So I'm going to remove the punctuation signs, as I told you before. The other thing that I'm going to use is lemmatize. And what lemmatize does is to identify the portion of the phrase and what function they have in the sentence. So in this case, I'm going to remove pronouns from the post because they are not needed for the sentiment classification. For example, if there's a very negative post about someone, we don't need to know who it is. We only need to know how the negative sentiment is expressed. So this is removed. This is a very short cleaning function, but in this case, this is the processing that we are going to do. Because during the previous processing here, I changed the accents from the Unicodes that come in there in the file to the right ones like this. So this process in Spanish good because it has to be corrected before you use the NLP library. This has to be corrected before. So that's why I don't worry here about the accent changing, because I already did in the other function. But if I don't have that function previously, it is necessary to include here all the cleaning about accents and replacement for the right ones. Okay, so I'm going to apply this function to a post, for example, and this is the post. This is the triumph of the static energy over gravity force, and this is lemmatized. So this is the words that have meaning. Triumph is the verb triumph. Energy is a noun. Static is static without gender. Over, in this case, it changes the meaning actually, because it's not. This is like discardable. This is over. Okay, in this case, it was not precise. This is strength. It is the verb to force, and gravity. It's not perfect, but it gives us classification of the words and specifically lemmatizing of them. I wanted to show this because I know this is not a perfect process, but at least you know what you are getting with your own data and your own way of expression, because this is not like a book that someone read, it's your own speech. Now I'm going to import the vectorizer, and I'm going to define a classifier using the vectorizer and the function for data cleaning. let me see. What did I miss? Yeah, I forgot to import the libraries. Sorry. Okay. Now I'm going to create two vectors, one with the post texts and the other with the sentiment values. And I'm going to use these vectors to create a split test. One will be used as training and the other will be used as test. So this function basically took the original vector and split it in two. So the train will be 700 post and the test will be almost 200. I will use this one. When I put this random state, I mean that I won't use the post in order. It's going to be scrambled and you select 700 of them to train and almost 200 to test. What that proportion? Because I said that the test size is 20% of the whole size of the array. Okay, so let's see how we have in the training. You can see that these are scrambled data. It took from different positions. Then I'm going to create a pipeline using the classifier I already defined. And I'm going to define that the vectors of sentiment are integers, because if I don't do that, it generates an error in the following steps. So I will define that the type of these two vectors are integers because they have 1 and -1 values. Now I'm going to train the classifier using what? Using the vectors I already defined as training. It takes a time. It is processing 700 post and defining the sentiment depending on the information they already had. Okay, one of the things about this is, remember that I classify this in a somehow arbitrary way because it's more about how I feel about this emoji in front of this. So in this case, it is not an universal analysis system. It's more like Isabel analysis system because I define the value of the emojis. When you do your own, what I basically did was exporting this to Excel and adding another column with the sentiment I associate with each one. And that's what I put in this function. That's the result of a manual classification, but it's easier to classify, I don't know, 40 emojis than 2,000 posts. Okay, the training finished. And now let's see how it is going to predict. So using the content left for testing, I'm going to create a vector of predictions. So it's using this classifier that was previously trained with the training information. And now what we are doing is obtaining predicted sentiment. Now, the idea is to verify how precise it is. And it says that in case of negative sentiment, is 69% precise, and in the case of positive is 86% precise. It's not that bad because especially in the case of positive, it should be somehow accurate. This is the information we already have. So let's see how it works with actual content. So I'm going to use the train one, and I'm going to take a specific position and see how it classifies it. So this sentence say, I haven't seen before how this butterfly look in its caterpillar state. And it say it's a positive post. Remember, this was trained with my own data, and this information is also a post I already did. So somehow it should be accurate, but it's not necessarily accurate, but that's what we are trying to review. Take this another one. It's actually a complaint because I have to buy water, bottled water, because the pipes on my apartment bring debris. So it's a complaint. So the sentiment is real. Is like that. Let's try with this one. This is actually sarcasm. This is cute with our taxes. And it actually got it. It puts it like a negative sentiment that it is sarcasm. Probably because it's trained with my own speech. Probably that's why it works well. So the last one. It says science for all people, not only for the scientific elite. And it says it is positive. And actually it was in a positive sense that I said that. So this is a very simple way to do sentiment classification using your own data. So you can train a classifier to predict your sentiment. And in terms of what can you do with this, could because it's also classified in dates, you can know about how is your mood in time. It's not done in the example, but it's something that you can explore how your mood swings in time. And one of the motivation that I have to do this tutorial was giving people tools to know more about themselves. And in this case about sentiments, I think it could be very useful for people to know more about things they don't realize they are showing in social networks, and that can help them to gain more knowledge about their behavior and also how they interact with others. I didn't do anything with lots of information that this has, but I expected that it was very useful for you and you can expand this exercise. I really appreciate that you finished this tutorial. Here is more information, my blog that there's some info about data science, and the GitHub repo with all the content of this tutorial is available, so you can process your own data. Obviously, my own data is not uploaded in the repo, so you can replace my files for yours and you can do your own processing. Thank you so much.